Hello everyone and welcome to the afternoon. Now I have been assured that the next person up is so renowned or famous or infamous, I'm not entirely sure, that she is known only by her first name. One word like Madonna or Adele or the symbol formerly known as Prince, which is actually 6 words, but never mind. Anyway, I would like to invite Celia to the stage.
Oh, thank you. I thought you were talking about Hannah. Hannah. Okay. Kia ora, everyone. Did you all have a lovely lunch? Yes, it was lovely. It's my privilege to introduce Hannah O'Regan today. And her topic is Kei hiara taku whare kōrero, and the Pākehā bit you can read in your program. And Hannah is the General Manager of Oranga, or Wellbeing, for Te Runanga o Ngāi Tahu. She was previously Director of Māori and Pacifica and Director of Student Services at the Christchurch Polytechnic Institute of Technology. Oh, I wrote the whole thing out. Most of her career and life has been largely focused on Māori language revitalisation and Māori education. She is also an active advocate and driver for Ngāi Tahu Reo, revitalisation and strategy. And Pākehā tūtaku reo Māori, no reira, no Ngāi Tahu Hana, no reira, no tēnei whenua, tēnā tātou, just homai te pakipaki mā Hannah O'Regan.
O tēnei te mihi atu kia koe te hoa, kua ro te wā, nau anō I whakatūwhera, I tēnei wahaka kia au, nā reira kai te mihi atu kia koutou katoa haramai iwi I wā, koutou haramai tawhiti, koutou haramai tata, ki tēnei rohe o kaitahu, nei rā te ofa atu kia koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Welcome everybody, lovely to have you here today. I see some familiar faces in the room. Maybe that's good because you'll be able to sing my song. It's lovely to be here. It's a long way down there. Everyone can hear. Yep, kia ora everybody. This is an interesting spread. Probably, if we think of that as the far north, that means you guys are bluff and I should be closer to you. Okay, so as I said, thank you for having me here today. I haven't had to come far. I just walked past the Greyhounds. As the Ngāi Tahu buildings are literally just over the show over there, at Show Place even. Open your kaupapa. When I was asked first to speak to you here today, I thought, I think I've spoken to librarians before and I feel like a bit of a fraud because I'm not a great reader. I've got a bit, I referred to that a bit in the kōrero. But what's more, I thought, wasn't it just the other day that you guys were here having your national conference in Christchurch? And then I remembered, no, because that was in the convention centre and that no longer is. So it must be a while, I think, since the last, is that the last time? Yeah, you've been back since then? Wow, wow, so there you go. So let's hope that the last impact that you had as a collective on our city isn't relived in the next after this conference. Okay, kei hiara taku whare kōrero. Where is the house of my voice? My own understanding of my whare kōrero, the space that houses my own historical narratives, stories and knowledge, has been something that has, surprisingly enough, developed over time. It has been constructed in parts and in different stages, and often without an architectural plan. There have been times where I have added adornments to my whare, before realising that the foundations upon which they stood were flawed and required attention. I have repiled my house numerous times. Each time the whare kōrero, the house of my stories, the house of my voice, has taken a new shape and design. It's fulfilled new functions. New and additional rooms been added and some other been relegated to the demolition list. That's because my own knowledge system has changed over time. My knowledge base has shifted and grown as I have. But like my whare, my ancestral roundhouse down in Bluff, Aurua, gotcha, pictured here, I can return to my whare kōrero for shelter when the world doesn't make sense or when I don't feel a part of it. I can go there to regroup and reflect when faced with life's challenges. I can draw from past experiences and learnings when I need to plan my next path ahead. And I can meet and join with my relations, or in this case, my whare kōrero, with those who might think and feel as I do, or are driven by the same kaupapa. Like a library, one might surmise, my whare kōrero has purpose. It has function. It needs to have purpose. It needs to have function. Because if it isn't used, if it isn't accessed, as would be the case of a whare in the same situation, then it becomes what we might term a whare puka were were, a house of spiders that might be in structure, intact, but no one goes. A whare karo, a lost house, a barren house. In this case, the stories become silent, its purpose diminished, its ability to influence, innovate, and create, they become less and less relevant. It can be filled with amazing resources and knowledge. It can have the most beautiful adornments, the most glorious of carvings. But if no one touches them, if no one sees them, if no one feels them or learns about them, then they are left to join the ranks of that knowledge of the human memory bank that is lost to time. My whare kōrero influences how I see the world, how I see myself and those around me. Although it is mine by right, my inheritance, after all, it is the collection of experiences and knowledge that has made me and is about me and is me, I don't always have the key to access it. What I want to share with you today is a kōrero into my whare kōrero. That's a kōrero. Okay, that sounded good when I wrote it. And I want to look at some of the inherent challenges in accessing the knowledge and roles within it, and the roles that other people have had in its identification, its construction, its maintenance. As I do so, I'd like you to consider what form your whare kōrero takes, be it your own personal house of thoughts and knowledge, skills and experience, or the whare kōrero or library that you work in, or work for, or are associated with. I'm not judging. I was aware from a young age, I know, good looking, I was aware from a young age of the power of words, both spoken and written, and those words etched into other modes, other forms. Mine was a world of words, debates, politics, local and international, poetry and protests, dining room conversations that would take you from the realm of medicine to what might be happening in West Papua politics. It was all go. The hardest challenge, as anyone who's ever spent time with my father would know, was actually trying to get a word in edgeways. Knowledge, though, was hugely respected in my whānau. On my Irish side, there was a rich, Irish and Scottish side, there was a rich sense of history and a legacy that came from that experience, the fight against colonialism and the rights of the colonised. And on my Māori side, very similar, although a lot closer to home. Education and the acquisition of knowledge, because of the power it held, was seen and promoted as the way to bring about justice, to develop and to thrive. It was the way considered within my whānau that helped people prevail as a people. But there was also a painful realisation on both sides of my whakapapa as to what knowledge had been lost to us. Although the same was the case for my Gaelic-speaking ancestors, The generational loss there happened another generation earlier in our whānau. And so it seemed even more distant from our reality. The loss of Māori language in my whānau seemed more raw, present and relevant. Our heritage language took with it, when it departed our whānau, it took with it the cultural confidence, the tools to really delve into a Māori worldview, our personal and tribal histories, our storytelling practices, knowledge of waiata and whakapapa, prayers and rituals, much of which sits in the halls of your institutions or the shelves. For me, the youngest of 5 children, it felt like I couldn't quite be who I wanted to be, who I felt like on the inside. Because even though I lived in the world of words, those words were largely English words, and they didn't open up completely the other world that was in front of me. And I was desperate to explore it. As a child, I was offered glimpses into that world. It looked to me like a fantastic whare to be in and to explore. But it was a long way away from me then, out of reach. My world, the world that helped make me, the house of my tribal history and narratives, my being, was not open to me because I did not have the language or the tools to access it. Not only did I not have the key, I didn't have the password to get into the gate, and it was like one of those gated communities with fences 2 meters high, probably stretching the analogy a bit too far, but I think you get the point. It just was out of reach. And it's understandable, because in my family, that language loss happened a long time ago. Te wā i hika tō mātou whare kōrero, the time that language departed from my family was over 120 years ago. My great-grandparents were native speakers. They're very little up there. It was a long time ago. I don't think they made big photos. They were native speakers. But for some reason, they chose not to raise my taua, my grandmother, in Te Reo. She was born in 1900. She was the eldest of 5 children. So she grew up prior to World War I. She was a teenager in World War II, and she didn't have access to her native language. She knew she was Māori. Her parents were native. But when she had my father, there must be a theme going on, because he was born on the day World War II broke out, so she wouldn't have been that much of a teenager. Let's not do the maths. Again, another child was born into that family who did not have access to their heritage language. My father actually started to learn Te Reo. He learnt at university. And when I came to be, there was 4 others before me, when in our family we got little bits, but he didn't raise us with what he knew at home. We knew instructions, but again, what we got access to was very limited. With each generation, I should have shown these other photos. That's my great-grandmother and my grandmother holding my dad. That's my grandmother with the tiki on her neck. That's my father with hair. And then my father without hair holding me. That's me. Stop it. And these are my babies. With each generation of language loss in my whānau, more and more rooms of our whare kōrero were closed off and barred up. They were closed from view. The paintings and photos that adorned those walls began to fade, and the carvings, the tuku panels, and the stories that they carried, they decayed and fell away. Fell away from our collective memory as a whānau. Many of our narratives and kōrero, our photos and records still sit in the libraries around the country now, but most have been lost from the consciousness, our consciousness as a people, because the connections to them have been lost or frayed with the dislocation that's happened over time, and because of our capacity to engage with them. My whānau narrative is no different from the much used reference for the time it takes to break something, compared to how quickly or how long it takes to fix it. Like with any house, the house of my knowledge, the house of my language, was destroyed in a flash. It was demolished in no time at all. Well, in Christchurch, we could probably use the analogy, it just took one shake. But in the case of a language, it just takes one generation. One generation to stop using it, and then it's gone. But it takes a great more deal of effort and time to restore it if you do manage to find the resources and the strength to do so. In our whānau, it took a great deal of time to even get to the starting point of trying to bring it back. We started rebuilding our language house 50 years ago without a real blueprint or an idea of what we wanted it to look like. We didn't have qualified builders or architects around. We didn't have people who knew about the language or how to teach it left within our iwi. When I started to learn the language, there were only 5 Kaitahu native speakers still alive. This is Uncle Jacko. He was the last, and he died. I was just with his daughter yesterday, sorry. He died on the 5th of December 2011, the last repository of our dialect. So we didn't have a generation of people that we could call upon. We didn't have experts to help guide us in the building project. What tools to use, what materials, when's the best time, and who do I need to have alongside of me? All we knew is that we wanted to have access to the wealth of information that was historically housed in this whānau and in the whare kōrero before it was destroyed. But we actually had no idea of its breadth and its depth, its design and the role it played in the lives of our families. So we started to rebuild and research and learn, and as I did my whare kōrero, as I learned, my whare kōrero started to take on more shape, more character, more connection. And now, as I was able to feed my own children with the new old words I was finding and tell them the stories and whakapapa of our land that I was just uncovering for the first time myself as I went through old manuscripts and I delved through the materials in libraries, in archives, then my whare kōrero started to take shape. And it was exciting. It was exciting as my language developed to finally be able to be on the inside of the house, not just peering in from the window's edge. Unfortunately, it became obvious that not all whānau, however, wanted to live in this whare. They'd set up camp elsewhere and weren't that enthused by a prospect of committing to another generation of learning and hard work, committing to another rebuild. People in Christchurch can probably get their head around that. There's an issue there that one needs to consider what the point is of building a house or a library if you can't persuade the people to live in it, to commit to its maintenance and ongoing development. I knew I wanted it. I knew that was a house. I knew I wanted that knowledge and the breadth of knowledge for me or for my children. I wanted them to have the richness of their cultural knowledge and information accessible to them, immersing them in it, fostering their development as kaitahu and informing how they saw and related to the world. Our journey became one where the task of designing and building was one that every generation had to commit to and work on themselves. But there was always the risk that it could all fail again in one generation if one generation turned its back on our whare and decided that the task was too great. But it's not just as easy as preparing yourself for the build and thinking that you're going to get stuck in and do the work, get your hands dirty, get in there, expand your knowledge, research, learn. I could understand why people were resistant to engaging in this thing that I felt so passionate about, that I saw as being so valuable. And maybe that's the first challenge we have when we're thinking about our whare kōrero. We have to understand why we might be challenged to engage others, especially others from diverse communities, or in this case, Māori, Ngaitahu. In order to understand the why, we must acknowledge how we got into a situation in the first place where we even have to consider how we respond to our Indigenous community? How did our house of knowledge get damaged? Who tore down the walls and forced the occupants out of it? Why might there be such an ingrained mistrust of public institutions and what they say? If we want to understand that, we need to appreciate how it felt or feels for people to be disconnected from their own knowledge systems, to not feel like they're informed and educated or have access to information about themselves, when they don't feel like they own their own story. You can't just build a new house and expect that they still know how to work in it, to live in it, to own it, when the opportunity has been denied for generations. What we need to do is actually address the way people feel themselves about our institutions, about the whare kōrero, and actually about that knowledge. This was certainly my experience. I remember feeling conflicted about the stuff I heard from the wider world as a child and the information I was exposed to on the home front. The two knowledge worlds didn't seem to relate to each other or even understand each other. I felt the impacts of stereotyping of Māori knowledge and culture and people from the age of 5. No guessing what happened when I turned 5. I know I felt being Māori and kaitahu in a way that my skin colour or language ability didn't reflect. And I was hungry for knowledge and desperate to understand it. With the little bits I did have, I would try and use them to full effect in every way that I could. But something was a barrier. I was told on my first day of school by my siblings not to tell people I was Māori because I would get picked on and school life would be hard. I'm the youngest of 5 children, so everyone else knows that you never listen to what your older siblings tell you. But it was hard at times. I felt the pressure of the stereotypes, even though I was fair, when I heard people talking about Māori, talking about the culture, talking about the language. I thought to myself, how could I access the world that I felt so passionate about if I was being forced to deny its existence? So, what does a youngest child do? They play up. Everything I could do, I tried to make Māori. I managed to find a picture of, okay, it's not a good picture, but an example of my creative writing. All of my topics would usually be about Māori characters, and my bad pictures would usually try and have Māori symbols. I'm not sure where that patu came from, but I don't think it was South Island origin. Whatever words I knew, I would rock them out at every opportunity. I'd even rock out a haka, even though I probably didn't know what I was doing. Each effort being another building block for my whare kōrero. I was committed to it. I wanted to validate it and give it voice. There wasn't much in the way of Māori material in the libraries back then to help spark my interest. There were a few Māori stories with pictures, school journals rocked out some Māori content, but pretty much the literature world didn't reflect back to me a sense of my culture and my identity. It seemed antiquated and more reminiscent of stories of a culture relegated to history, the way Māori once were, an old-time Māori, as opposed to a dynamic and changing, evolving culture of the now or the future. I grew up with a sense of Māori being outside of the literature world. The whare kōrero that did exist seemed to be one constructed by others about Māori. And this was compounded by what I was hearing about Māori learners in the school system and through the media. Ironically though, as I said before, this contrasted with my own reality. I grew up in a whare full of books. There were wall-to-wall bookshelves in my father's study and books with things that needed respect and care. You were never allowed to make a dog's ear. You were never allowed to write in a book. Books sometimes got treated better than us. Actually, I'm glad Dad isn't here at the moment. They had a huge status in our whānau. It was therefore of great concern to my parents that I struggled with reading. I was the only child to struggle with reading. And I actually took no pleasure from it. As my father told the Lianza conference 7 years ago, I think, he left the script as we were talking. I'd written the script, but he left it when he said, you know Hannah's problem? Hannah's real problem is that she's the kind of person that waits for the video to come out. I quietly, while on stage, tried to remind him that we were speaking to librarians, but the point was lost on him. Despite this failing of mine, I was fascinated by knowledge, and especially the way that people learnt and acquired it. And I didn't think it had to be limited to the written form. I was fascinated by how stories were transmitted, what made things important enough to be retold and remembered. And I was also challenged from an early age by the notion that knowledge acquisition and the power that came with it often bypassed large numbers of the community, the Māori community. Not only did they get access to the key, not only did they not get access to the key to open up the knowledge worlds, they were often not even told where they might be able to find the house of their voice at a later point. I was very young when I first started hearing about Māori illiteracy and heard about Māori being kinesthetic learners, not academic learners. Have you heard that? Yeah? No? Everyone? Yeah? I should have got you to raise your hands because that was just a lot of kind of little nods. Well, I grew up learning that Māori were good with their hands. They were kinesthetic. And this went hand in hand often, no pun intended, with the bombardment of other negative stereotypes that also boxed Māori into a few chosen subject areas. When people were asked what Māori represented, what Māori were good at, the things that Māori were often talked about being good at were good at sport, good at singing, playing the guitar, good artists, they've all got rhythm, great drinkers, not mentioning you, Cecilia, good at a party, fun-orientated and good humour. And they came alongside a whole stream of the negative. Just think about it for a moment. At the pub, at the RSA, at a Winston Peters gathering, wherever you are, when they talk about Māori, just think for a moment. What do they think about Māori? Because these are the good bits, and we know what follows. And actually, as I say when I do sessions on stereotyping, if you happen to be one of those Māori that have no rhythm, can't sing and can't throw a ball for shit, you actually haven't got a lot left. I know. I'm not talking to you, it's all right. But the world that I was exposed to on the home front, as I said, was so different. The people my father brought into our lives, and my mother, they had a wealth of knowledge and a passion that didn't fit into this picture. It didn't fit into the statistics built in the minds of the wider community, or the negative statistics. Low educational achievement, low health outcomes, prisons, domestic violence, once were warriors. That wasn't the world I saw. I had exposure to people like Auntie Tiawe Davis from Maniopoto, a master weaver, an imparter of knowledge, who wove her stories into her art that adorn many of our wharenui here in the Te Waipounamu. The late Cliff Whiting, who again carved and etched his stories into the walls of our country, brought our narratives to life. Sandy Adset, the same. These three people were people that my father hung around with. And I listened to them and their knowledge and their worlds of knowledge. They didn't need to write a book. Their knowledge systems were immense. Their ability to transmit their thinking was immense. And they had an ability to also inspire others around them and help others own those stories. I wondered whether or not the wider community even knew about those whare kōrero, or mine. So much seemed to fall from our collective consciousness as a nation, as if we were suffering selective amnesia, where the only Māori story we wanted to tell as a country was the Māori story that Māori weren't in control of, the picture that others felt comfortable with. Unfortunately, that reality, that story, did start to have a generational impact on how Māori started to see themselves and how Māori started to engage with knowledge and the houses that housed them. The negative stereotypes weren't being contested in the public domain with alternative views, alternative stories, alternative realities. Māori knowledge was battling to be acknowledged, let alone their values to be valued and respected. My personal view is that actually libraries had tried hard and were often pioneers in trying to advance cultural inclusivity. They tried. They would celebrate Māori Language Week, promote bilingual signage, display Māori art. But libraries have been historically pitched up against a bigger challenge, and that's society. Against the constructed societal expectations that have been created for Māori, whereby Māori often didn't feel like a part of the academic and literary world. Our education system continually failed to acknowledge our Māori history, positive stories, to invigorate the Māori language. The socio-political environment and the media told Māori they weren't really up to much. In fact, constructed it so they weren't going to be up to much. It was more about that story, or more about this story that wasn't told, that Māori didn't get access to. So even if those stories, even if the alternative views were housed in the libraries, Māori often didn't hear them. This hit home for me when I opened a new door to my whare kōrero in 1992. I know, I must have been so young. I broke out of my comfort zone because I was actually scared of libraries. That might have had something to do with not liking reading. I went through university, going to the university library 4 times. I managed to get my degree. Luckily, that was because it wasn't catalogued, but my father did have a lot of books. But I, in 1992, had to break my comfort zone because I got a job, very young, at the Alexander Turnbull Library. Who here's from the Alexander Turnbull? Great. I will now just change. No. The reason why I had to break my comfort zone was it was a new world for me. It wasn't just the Alexander. I was down in the bowels of the Alexander Turnbull Library, and my first job was going through the old Māori newspapers on microfiche. Do you remember what microfiche is? Well, that was a technical experience in itself. And I was going through all these old Māori newspapers because I'd been given a job because we'd just started the new Māori immersion schools, I think high schools, and we didn't have Māori immersion material. So Media Simpson, back in the day, suggested that we'd send this young intern down to sit down and go through these thousands of Māori newspapers to try and find some material that we could put into our Māori immersion schools. You know, the thing that shocked me, why I said I opened a new door to my whare kōrero, was because I didn't realise we had that literary heritage. It was the first I knew about this wealth of knowledge sitting down in the bowels of the Alexander Turnbull Library. As I read through those papers, hundreds of them, thousands of periodicals, as I started reading through these periodicals, I saw our people hungry for knowledge, passionate about information, interested in absolutely everything, weird stuff. People who have heard me speak before, the thing that I couldn't get out of my mind was discussions on practices of animal husbandry in Argentina. It was graphic. It's all right, I'm not going to go there. These were people in these old newspapers writing about politics in Russia, the construction, the engineering feats of the pyramids, comparing Shakespeare with Māori poets. It was a people hungry for knowledge, and not just hungry for it, they were creating it, they were debating it, they were researching it, they were engaged with it. And I thought, what's happened? What happened here? I had just been raised in the last 18 years at that stage listening to people talking about Māori illiteracy. That Māori were an oral culture, good with their hands. And yet here I am, day after day, night after night in the Alexander, day after day going through this stuff and actually being inspired. But at the same time, I was sad. How come I didn't know about this? How come this enriching part of my whare kōrero hadn't been accessible to me? How come when I was 15 and I was debating, because that's what you do when you're the youngest child, with the principal of the boarding school, which you shouldn't do when you're at boarding school and you don't go home, when I was debating with the principal about the fact that Māori language was the only language not to be considered an academic subject in our New Zealand curriculum, and that by studying Māori I had less ability to actually get a good grade in the sixth form, in the old days of the sixth form certificate, because the top grades went to the academic subjects, and every other language in our curriculum was considered to be academic except for Māori. And my principal said to me, lovely Ngāi Tahu woman, she said, that's because Māori doesn't have a literary heritage. I'm like, I was 15. I didn't at that stage have a response other than, that's stupid. Which was probably better than the alternatives at the time. And yet here I was a few years later. And what are you talking about? Didn't have a literary heritage. Why did Māori get placed with woodwork and home economics? These guys were the people writing in these newspapers. They created a literary heritage and done it in a short period of time. No one told me back then that actually at the turn of the century you were more likely to be literate if you were Māori than if you were Pākehā. How come that wasn't the headlines for our children to see? That you were more likely to be literate if you were Māori. And that Māori were one of the fastest races in the world to acquire literacy. I think second to the Cherokee Indians in terms of the rate at which they adopted literacy. How come that's not part of our historical narrative? And it isn't, because I spoke to the New Zealand Secondary Schools History Teachers Conference last year, and I asked them how many of them knew about the Māori newspapers. One put their hand up. And this is our history teachers. Lovely people. Here I was in the Alexander Turnbull Library. The contradiction of the world systems that I knew was in my face. I was face to face with these contradictions day in and day out, knowing there was a different reality, knowing there was a different world that if only our people had access to, they might start thinking differently about the current predicament, about their expectations for themselves and their own children. It struck me, the power of knowing the other story, the story of the positives, the story of resilience, the story of perseverance. And I understood that without that story, without knowing it, why people would over time start to feel a mistrust and an alienation from the world of knowledge. How greater the appetite for education and knowledge might be if our people were supported to deconstruct the myths about themselves, about their own stories and histories, about our potential. Those myths that they've been subjected to for generations. Imagine that hunger for the wider world and knowledge encapsulated in the columns of the old newspapers. Imagine that in the here and the now, in the minds and hearts of our tamariki and mokopuna. Imagine if they had access to those whare kōrero, those narratives, and that they learnt of the literary prowess of our people as opposed to only hearing about being the tail of an education system. So that brings me back full circle to my question around my own language, my own voice, my whare kōrero. How do I ensure my voice and the voice of my people is heard and present in the wider discourse? I have to do something about it myself. How do I protect and pass on my whare kōrero to my own children and iwi? Well, I need to rebuild my whare for my language and probably pimp it out and change it from the current lean-to that it currently resembles and be the kind of whare that I want, that all the mokopuna would want to come and stay at. But the first thing is I need to start. If I want the wider world to be available to my babies, my iwi, and for them to be able to access it through their heritage language, I need to think of a way we can open up the doors of our whare kōrero to give my people voice again. I've just finished writing. I might not read, but sometimes I do a bit of writing. And I've just graduated with my PhD. That's okay, thank you. Some people might have thought it took a bit long to get there, but what I did here was to construct my own whare kōrero. It's the popo in the middle of that house, that's my wharero, our round house down in Bluff. And one of the central popo is of my tipuna Meriana Teitei. That's who's pictured there in the middle. If I want my children to understand the Māori worldview and be able to express it in their own way, then I needed to actually go and do the research and pull together the parts, unearth the lost kōrero, unearth the lost words, sentences, structures, and bring it back into the house. I had to think about the kind of knowledge that I needed to pull together to make my whare strong, to make sure that the stories that needed to be told are told and are heard, and to make sure that some people and our whānau would want to reside in it. It's so crucial to get the right narratives. They have to be connected to place and people. They have to be relevant. They have to have purpose. They have to be useful. And they have to be strong enough to stand the test of time, to stand against the elements. This new embodiment of my whare kōrero runs the same risk as libraries do. If it's not relevant, I put a coffee cup as opposed to a wine glass. There was a few Pinot Gris that were sacrificed in the making of that. This new embodiment of my whare kōrero runs the same risk as libraries do now. Ka pai, good timing. If it's not relevant, if it's not used, then it will cease to serve a purpose. And it will also fade from the collective memory bank of our people. The challenge for me is a daily one, but my love for knowledge and the belief in what access to it can do for people, their hearts and minds, and complete well-being, means that I will continue to do whatever I can to fight for its existence, to fight for its accessibility and relevance. We simply have too much to lose if we don't. Luckily, I only graduated in July and it's only just come out, so I've got it hasn't got a layer of dust yet settled upon its pages. But if I do fail to make it worth it, then it was a good effort and a good few Pinot Gris and a lovely graduation ceremony. But it won't have been useful. The title is Te tima taka mai o te waia te taka mai o te reo. And it comes from a narrative from one of our tupuna, Matiaha Tiramoruhu, who was also the tipuna that started the Ngaitahu claim in 1849. He wrote this narrative that I came across from the Hocken Library. Anyone here from Hocken? And it was actually later published by Ray Barlow. And that narrative was te timataka mai o te waitataka mai o kātua, the beginning of the singing of the gods. And it talked about the creation story of Ngaitahu. So it came to me that when I'm talking about the revitalization of Ngaitahu Reo, of the language within our people, that I should go back to the narratives and the dreams and the aspirations that were housed in the pages of that manuscript. How to bring about, again, the singing of the creation of our voice. So in summary, I believe that we need to be aware of the ways that the institutions house our whare kōrero and how our institutions are perceived and by who. We have to own the legacy that we inherit as a country around the way that we have historically treated Māori knowledge and the generational impact that has had an impact on Māori cultural and social and educational self-esteem. That's not at the hands of the libraries. This is at a societal level. And we need to look at how we can encourage people to access their own whare kōrero, to build them, to start picking up the building tools to explore, to redecorate, to develop. Huakina mai ka tatau o tō whare kōrero. It's right that you open the doors of your house of stories. Nā reire te iwi, ko te waitataka mai, te timataka mai, o te reo, tēnā tātou. Kia ora.
He pātai, does anyone have any questions? There, we have some people with, mihini kōrero. Microphones, oh my gosh. Questions, anybody? Don't be scared. Moata.
We won't make you sing poie again, sorry.
Kia ora.
Kia ora.
I was just wondering, what were the main challenges for you as a non-native speaker, basically a second language learner, learning as an adult? What were the main things that were the challenges, and maybe what were some ways around those challenges? Because it's a lifelong journey for me to reclaim my reo as well, and it's one that occasionally I'm doing quite well at, and other times it's put aside in favour of other priorities. So yeah, I'd love to hear about that.
Well, I started learning at school, so I started learning as a second language. You know how you'd learn French and Latin and you don't use it outside the classroom? That was pretty much my reality with te reo. But how did it feel? Actually, the biggest challenge was finding other people to talk with. I then added on a whole nother level of complexity by trying to be a staunch kaitahu person and use the dialect when no one else in the country was using it. It was like just wanted to make life harder for myself. But the biggest challenge was being hungry for it and feeling like it was taking too long to be able to get the details. But the epiphany for me was actually in the Alexander Turnbull Library. Reading through those manuscripts and finally being at a point where I thought, I can understand what they're saying. Wow, this is exciting. It's illuminating. And I realised then that I didn't have to get it all right. I didn't have to actually have it all down pat. It was okay to make mistakes. When we're working with Papa Timoti, we try to minimise the mistakes we make. But I'm the same in my English with my father. I cannot go through, and my mother and father, I cannot go through a whole sentence, really, without being corrected about pronunciation, the wrong use of the word, or, it's actually, I have panic attacks doing dual keynotes with him, as I've already described. And I don't think that I need to, as I'm a native speaker of English, but not at his level, I don't think I have to be at his level. And I guess that's where I got to with my Māori as well. I needed to actually feel good about what I had been able to achieve. My response to my father, by the way, when he said, Hannah's one of the people that wait till the movie comes out, I did say, well, yes, this is an example of the way that across generations people treat knowledge differently, because the fact that I might have written 12 books doesn't seem to enter onto a scale of status with my father. And the same thing I think happens with our reo. We beat ourselves up for what we don't have instead of celebrating what we do. And as long as you've got the passion and the eagerness to keep on developing it, to keep on building your whare kōrero, you do so knowing that what you do in this generation makes a profound difference for the generation after you. Every word that you share with a child or family member, every word that you impart to others, be it in written form or whatever form, every word you share that's normalised with them is one less word they have to learn. So when you start celebrating the fact that the language that I have is more than my grandmother 117 years ago, I can think, yep, I could beat myself up, or I could say, hey taua, hey grandma, my children are going to be better than me, and your descendants will have it back, whether they like it or not. So keep at it. We have to think intergenerationally. We talk about how easily a house is demolished. We say it takes one generation to lose a language and at least 3 to get it back. So be in for the long haul, it's worth it.
Hello, my name's Sue Fargo. I'm from Central Hawke's Bay District Libraries.
Kia ora.
And I just want to say that this year I believe our council turned a corner, and I'm really proud of them because I haven't been in the past, but now we have, every 2 weeks we have Māori lessons at council. But I went along thinking, oh, there'll be 6 people there. The room is full. So it's wonderful for a council that has performed very badly in that way, and we're learning pronunciation.
Fantastic.
No, it's a start.
It is
I'm proud of them.
It's a huge, be proud, you rock that. It is a huge impact, and I think the pronunciation of te reo is incredibly important, and it can change the way somebody engages with you in your organisation. It can change the way they engage with you as a person. And when I said every word counts in terms of what you transmit to other people, the next generation, Every positive kia ora, every time that you make the effort to pronounce somebody's name right, is one less barrier that they have to, one less issue of whakamā or embarrassment that they have to get over and overcome. So I go hard, keep on that path and tell the council that, great, well done in that regard. And like I did say that I actually think the library world has pioneered, even within, it was in front of the education system, was in front of the health system in terms of celebrating Māori language and normalising bilingual signage and things like that. Unfortunately though, we still don't have enough Māori, we don't have enough content in there to provide a completely reflective view of the Māori world, and I think that's what we need to work on, getting more information out there. These are very easy questions, whānau.
Kia ora hana. Nā mihi kia koe mō tō kōrero mai kia mātou. Just harking back to your kōrero about intergenerational transmission, I really salute you in the fact that you have managed to maintain that. And speaking for myself, I managed for about the first 2 years of my baby's life and then it fizzled out. So how do you maintain that momentum of keeping your whānau sort of kōrero Māori in the kāinga all the time?
I threaten them. Actually, one of the things I write in my thesis, it was called the intergenerational transmission of guilt. And I talked about those mother moments that you're not that happy about, but I felt like actually putting it in my thesis as part of my personal narrative around language transmission in the home was true. And I did. Sometimes I'm that one that's guilty for just saying, harping on about kōrero Māori. And I'll give you an example. It's another Quake example. But I've said to my children, made sure, come on, you need to speak the language or it will die. From an early age. One of the things that happened when the first earthquake hit, and of course it was in the middle of the night, 4 o'clock in the morning, 5 o'clock in the morning or something ridiculous, and it was pitch black and, their father was nowhere to be seen. Managed to get the children and my boys. First of all, he was 6 and he's pulling at my t-shirt saying, "Mama, please, Mama, me karakia kia ruaumoko, kia tauai tēnei, Mama, please pray to ruaumoko." And I'm thinking, pray to ruaumoko? We live at the bloody beach. I need to go get the life jackets now. And then at that stage, and he's absolutely just mortified, and I thought, actually, this is so big, the house was just shaking so much, I thought, this is it, we're gone. If the last thing I do is settle my children down, if they want that through the language, that's what I'll do. So I prayed to Ruaumoko, and then when the tidal wave didn't hit, I thought, now I need to go get the tsunami kit. And then so I managed to get them and my whāngai niece, I got her and everyone in the bed, still didn't know where the father was, got everyone settled, and I said, right, taihua, ka haere au ki te tiki, te rama, me te waia. I've just got to go get the torch and the wire, the phone. And then my boy goes, "Ko mama, e mohi au he ahi pēnei ai." "No, Mum, no, I know why this has happened." And I'm like saying, "Kia tau, kei te pai koe, ka haere au ki te tiki waia. It's all good, just stay there, I won't be, just over there. He goes, ko mama, nōku te here, the fault is mine." And I'm like, "Baby, hea te mate." He goes, "I koro pāka maua ko Manu Hire." Manu Hire and I were speaking English. Now, you want to talk about intergenerational transmission of guilt? That's an example. And you know what was worse, whānau? At that moment, I didn't go, "Carl, darling." I did. I said, baby, e hara ia koe te here, the fault's not yours. Ekari me koro Māori ki tō tuine. The fault's not yours, but make sure you speak Māori to your sister. That's right, tsunami. So even in those times, I think, my children have been slightly scarred. But the reality was, in that when you say how I do it, I argue with them in Māori, I praise them in Māori. My daughter was telling me what clothes that she needed for me to take to her for her school in Māori on the text when I'm meant to be preparing for this. I have to just keep it up. It's really hard because they challenge me with it all the time. They're 13 and 14 now. And the thing is that I have gone into, when I go into that lower self, you know, when you're that lower self mother moment, you don't know what I'm talking about. When the bit that you're not happy about, you know, when afterwards you regret. When I do that, I've actually spoken English to my children about 4 times now, maybe 5. Actually, this year probably 7, they're teenagers. And when I'm losing it, when I'm nutting out, I go into English. For them, actually, mama speaking English to them is more traumatic than what comes out of mama's mouth. So at one level, I hold on to that, and I can be telling them something, and they say, "Mama, me kōrero Māori koe." I'm like, that's good, because they've forgotten everything I just said. So persevere. It's I don't know if it's going to work. I'm going to make sure that I steal my grandchildren if it doesn't. But you can only give it your best shot. And what you've done, even if you haven't been able to maintain it, you've probably still created enough of a platform that they know that when they have children, that their relationship is built, their relationship of love and connection and community and support is housed in the language, and the language is respected within that, so they're more likely to be able to pass it on. Sorry, that was a very long story for an answer to a question. He pata anō? No, ka pai.
So, tēnā koe Hana, mō tō whakamārama mai, ki au nei, ko tō whare kōrero, me he te. I just said that her whare kōrero was boss.